Well, this video is not going to show you how to do the fuel pump on a Sebring convertible. I just want to give you some quick tips. I had to take this fuel pump out last night. It wasn't bad per se. What was wrong with it was the check valve, which holds the fuel pressure in the lines. So when you go to start the car up, it's got pressure all the way up into the lines, into the fuel injector, and it starts right away. So in my case, I'd have to crank it a while to get, because the check valve wasn't working, the pump was working, to get all the fuel up into the lines again, or I could cycle the key several times. That could be a problem sometimes. Now, if you got a bad fuel pump, I just want to say, first off, you want to check the relay. And another quick way to check if it's a fuel pump is to take starting fluid and just spray it inside the engine, see if it starts up. It starts up and stalls, you know it's fuel related. It could just be the relay. It could possibly be the fuel filter clogged up. I did not change the fuel filter. I thought I had one. I had the wrong one from like 12 years ago. I says, I'm not getting another one. But I put like 100 gallons of, well, enough to treat 100 gallons of fuel of Startron fuel enzyme cleaner into this fuel tank, trying to get that check valve freed up. Did not work. I tried several cans of the best SDP Ultra. Did not work, but I know that must have cleaned my fuel filter really good, so I'm not worried about leaving the old fuel filter in there. Just a couple tips. This thing has a plastic ring on it, black plastic ring with a gasket. And I know they showed you there's a special tool to take it off, which is ridiculous. You can also use a strap wrench, a rubber strap wrench. What I like to do is you take your socket like this. This is a 1/2-inch drive, and you put it on reverse ways, and you tap to be a black ring on here with ridges. You hammer it, and you get it loose that way. So that's what I do. This way you don't mess up any of the plastic going around the pump. The other thing I do is when you're taking out the fuel fittings, you got to squeeze together. There's like a plastic thing on here. You crimp it together, and you can do it with your fingers, but it's easier to do it with pliers. And I always love these little skinny, cheap pliers that came with an old '74 Toyota Corolla. That I use it for everything. It seems like they fit in little places. Just perfect for squeezing those that fitting together so you can pull off the lines. Now, the one problem you're going to find out with these older cars is everything is crusty. If you're going to do this car, if you're going to change this fuel filter when this car was only a few years old, fuel pump when it was a few years old, it'd be way easier to do. This car is a Florida car. It doesn't have any rust on it. But that's something else. If you're under there while you're doing a fuel pump, get some of this stuff. Rust reformer. I was spraying my brake lines with this while you're under there. Get all that stuff. And after that, I went over it with this clear. So basically, when I got painted, I just doused it. So if I got some of the clear on the green part, it just stayed green because the car is green. There's also a couple of grease fittings in the back. I know probably when you take your car to get greased, they probably miss it all the time. While you're under there, get those 2 grease fittings. There's one on each side. If you took this to a shop, they would not be painting any rusty brake lines or any rust under there with rust killing primer. They would not be greasing those joints. The other thing is there's a drain on the tank. Drain most of the fuel out as you can. Now, I'll tell you the truth, this job was pretty hard because the parts were old. Getting that filler, the filler hose off where it attaches to the tank, I think that thing, I thought it was glued on there, for crying out loud. It was giving me a hard time. So what I do is I loosen up all around the rubber and I spray WD-40 in there. Now, I like using this WD-40. I can't even find it in the stores. I get it on Amazon. It's really like the equivalent of PB Blaster. It's got more of a penetrant, because WD-40 says water displacement. This is actually a rust buster. Besides, it's a specialty product of WD-40. I use this all the time. A little more money, but I found it works great with the electrical connectors, better than an electromotive cleaner. I spray all the electromotive connectors with this stuff before I connect them back on. I spray all the bolts. When I put the hose back on, the filler, rubber filler hose that goes from the filler tube down to the gas tank. There's a little hose about that long. I use some grease. I know you're not, I know they tell you, some people say don't use the grease because the grease screws up the rubber after a while. Well, it's a type of rubber designed to, I know, I heard this stuff, but it's a type of rubber designed to work with fuel. So the grease isn't going to mess it up. As a matter of fact, I always put grease on the hoses before I install them because it keeps that little bit of rust off of them, and it makes it easier to take the hose off later when you have to change the hose. And when I put this thing back on, this it's a black plastic thing with it screws on to the top of the tank, and there's a rubber gasket. You get a new rubber gasket with it. I put grease on that too, grease on that. So this pump actually still works. I could probably keep it for something for, I don't know, just pumping fuel or something. I don't know if I'm going to throw it away right away. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know. Maybe I will. But the thing is, little attention to detail. You're not going to get that kind of attention to detail if you take it to a shop. But to tell you the truth, the older the car is, the older cars have less things to go wrong. But already when you're getting even into the 90s or 80s, which are, their cars are like 25 years old now or 35 years old, they already got computerized components on it. This car is fairly complex because at the time it was not the bottom end car. It's a JXI. I don't know, it's got more stuff in it than an average car, even from 99. Not that it's a real high end or anything, but there's a lot more problems with them today to deal with. But the disadvantage of working with older cars is all the parts are kind of crusty. Like the plastics are more brittle, the hoses are more brittle, all that stuff. Also want to say that you got to take the back seat out to get at it's right here. This grommet goes through the floor. You got to take the back seat out, the bottom half of the seat and the top half of the seat. To get this, it's actually under the top half of the seat. There's a couple 11/16 bolts after you pry up the seat, the bottom seat, with a small crowbar. You pop up the seat. Actually, I just fixed one of the metal brackets on there that was rusted away on the upper seat. Repaired it and put a new one in there, so it's in there solid as new. But you got to disconnect this wire and push this grommet out before you start dropping the tank. And you also got to get that fuel line disconnected from the filter when it's coming in from the all the way forward to the car. Because don't just drop the gas tank and don't disconnect everything. You got an evaporator hose you got to pull off. That just pulls off. You got the main filler tube hose. You got the vent tube hose right next to that. Right next to it where you fill up the car, there's a vent, and there's also the main filler. There's the evaporator hose, as I was saying. There's this wire could stay on there. You can disconnect it later. It goes to the evaporator. Oh, I should also mention, you see these kind of connectors. You see this? When this is pressed in, that's locked. So a lot of times you got to pull these out, and I don't get them out with my fingernail. I got to put a little flat blade screwdriver in and pry it open. And then this, you got to press. I believe in this case it's press. Yeah, usually it's press. Sometimes the tab is right in here, and if you can see the tab, then you got to lift it up. But usually it's press. See, when this is locked down, when this is pushed in, this locks this part up here down. So you got to unlock this, pull that out, so you can press this, and then it pulls out. But like I said, all these fittings and stuff, I like spraying that stuff in there because it keeps them like, they're not going to get corroded. This stuff, I mean, this particular type of WD-40 keeps the corrosion away from electrical connectors far better than anything I ever seen, to tell you the truth. And maybe there's something better, but I don't know of anything better. It works better than regular WD-40 for keeping electrical connectors from getting rusty and stuff. And like I said, I put that on all the electrical connectors, all the bolts. Like the rubber, I use grease and stuff, put it all back together, kill any rust that I see. And but if you're doing this job, allow yourself some time. I worked on it last night, and I wanted to get it done because it was going to rain today, and it did rain a lot. You can see the ground is still wet out here. Um, I started, I don't know, I started like 10 o'clock. Then I went to the gym from 1 to 3, so maybe there's maybe that's 12:30 to 3:30. Then I worked on it till like 8:30 the next day in the wee hours in the morning. So, I ran into issues with just trying to get that hose off and stuff. You will run into issues because these are older cars. So again, you use the grease, use the WD-40, that type of stuff. When you're tapping this off, don't use this side of the socket. Use the blunt end of the socket with the extension in there. This way you don't mess that plastic thing up. Make sure you grease that when you put it back in there, because if you ever got to do it again, it's not going to be hermetically sealed. Plus, the grease makes sure that gasket doesn't get pinched up or something when you're tightening it down. A lot of people don't do this kind of shit, even the mechanics, unless the old school ones.